Hey listeners, thanks for dropping in. I'm Christy.
And I'm Melissa, and this is Buried Motives, where we dig deep into the details of some of the most gruesome
Dirtbag murderers.
Hey listeners.
Welcome back to Buried Motives.
We are glad you're joining us this week. We hope you enjoyed our last week with Kim, and now Christy is back with an episode today.
It was so fun to do a collaboration with Kim Toller from A Million Other Choices. If you haven't checked her out yet, go do so. Also, before we start, we want to give a couple of shout outs.
Oh, we do. We have some very special listeners that are supporting us in a big way. We want to say thank you to Jennifer and Brittany and Sean for supporting us.
As well as Love, Marry, Kill. You guys delivered on adding to our snack pantry, and we really do appreciate it.
We are so grateful. Thank you for being such awesome listeners. And we want to thank Anita from Australia, who's sipping tea while we spill the tea.
Yes, Anita, thank you for purchasing one of our mugs, and thank you to everybody else who has already made purchases. If you haven't done that yet and you would like to, you can go check out our website at buriedmotives.com.
We hope you'll love the designs there.
And if you haven't yet and you do want to donate to our snack pantry, there is a link in every episode description as well as on our website.
If you could support us, we would really appreciate it. Shameless plug.
Again. A girl's got to do what a girl's got to do.
That's right. And a girl's got to talk about true crime.
Yes, and that is what you're here for today. So let's get into it. When you are a true crime podcaster, often people in your life will just text you the name of a dirtbag or a link to an article. No other text needed.
That happens all the time.
It does to both of us. And this is what happened with today's case. On a random day, my husband texted me the name of a dirtbag. When I looked up the name, the case was immediately familiar to me, and then I realized that a listener had requested this case as well, quite some time ago. I wasn't lying when I said we make a note of every single case suggestion. So, Brianna, I am finally doing your case suggestion. Thank you for being so patient. You requested this case almost exactly a year ago, but better late than never, I suppose.
With a little nudge from her husband.
Yep. My husband saw a post on X about this case recently because there was just a recent development about it. So perhaps now was the right time to finally cover this one. I will warn you that this case involves the murder of a child, so hang on to your hats. It's one that is truly heartbreaking. The dirtbag in this case was only 15 when she committed the murder, and her case has caused a lot of controversy. Some people think she is a victim of her circumstances. Others believe she is just pure evil. While I think that some aspects of the case might have been blown out of proportion, I do think that other parts of the case analysis is justified and spot on. For example, I don't think this girl's fashion choices or taste in music made her a murderer. But I also agree with those who believe she would be a threat to be released into the general public again. So let's get into it, and you can let me know what you all think.
This sounds fascinating, Christy.
It really is. I really got sucked in on the research of this case. As is the case with most children who commit murder, today's dirtbag did not have an easy childhood at first. She would be in a stable and loving home when she killed, but she certainly didn't start out that way.
Well, that is interesting.
It
Usually
is.
It's the other way around.
Right? Yeah, and this is one of those factors that does spark that debate. Trauma had already occurred, but she had so many opportunities handed to her to make a better choice.
Right. But your brain structure is laid down when you're young, and
True.
it's hard to fight against those connections that are your primary language then. You will always think in your native language, no matter how many languages you learn to speak after that. So the same thing is true of your first brain connections.
That's a good point, Melissa. Yeah, I'm very curious actually what your take is going to be on this one. I do want to note that there are minor discrepancies about dates and what order things exactly happened during her early years. I have done my best to piece it all together, but her ages could be off by a year or two for some of the instances because there were just so many different sources of information regarding these earlier days of the case. And I think some of the information was protected because she was a minor.
Oh, that often happens with those cases.
Yeah. Alyssa Bustamante was born on January 28, 1994 in California to teenage parents. Alyssa's parents, Michelle and Caesar, were cousins by marriage. No blood relation, but still maybe a little awkward for the families. Michelle Brooke was only 15 years old when she gave birth, so she could have been pregnant when she was 14. Right from the start, Alyssa was born into what you could describe as chaos. Not only were her parents still children themselves, but they were also already addicted to drugs, things ranging all the way from the devil's lettuce to crystal meth. Sadly, Michelle and Caesar were more concerned about getting their next hit than they were about taking care of a baby. It was pretty clear that baby Alyssa was not her parents' top priority and was, as a result, neglected. I believe she would be fed, but not really given the attentiveness that a little baby needs.
Okay, this is huge for attachment and future trust issues and feeling safe. And if you don't feel safe, then a lot of times you act out.
For sure, and I think we do see that with Alyssa. Michelle's parents, Karen and Gary Brooke, so Alyssa's grandparents, stayed involved and did try to help their daughter and granddaughter out however they could. By the time Alyssa was 2 years old, Karen and Gary purchased a trailer for the kids to live in, meaning Michelle, Caesar, and baby Alyssa. These grandparents paid for most of the young family's bills and would give money for groceries to make sure that their grandbaby wasn't going to bed hungry. Plus, Karen and Gary did their best to help their daughter fight her drug addiction.
Okay, so they have some support.
Definitely. Surprisingly, this generous offer from Michelle's parents worked, at least for a few years. Michelle and Caesar curbed their partying ways and actually started to take care of their daughter. When Alyssa was around 6 years old, her mother became pregnant again, this time with twin boys. Things went fairly well until the boys were born, and the stresses of parenthood became more than the young parents could handle. It didn't take long for both Michelle and Caesar to turn back to drugs and alcohol to avoid dealing with life.
That is a lot. 3 kids? They would only be 21?
Yeah, it was a lot on their plate for sure.
Twins is hard for anybody.
Yeah. To make matters worse, this time, taking drugs led to domestic violence between the couple. Caesar became mean while using and would regularly beat Michelle. The twins were babies, but Alyssa was old enough to see what was happening. Caesar held no punches, even when his little girl was watching. Caesar's violence quickly spread further than just towards the mother of his children. I am unsure of the exact date, but soon after the boys were born, Caesar was arrested and sent to jail because of assault charges. This left Michelle to deal with twin babies and a young child on her own.
Was she still living in the trailer and had support from her parents?
I believe so. I didn't read otherwise. Caesar would still be in jail when Alyssa would eventually commit murder. He is, or maybe was, serving 3 consecutive prison terms for 3 counts of felony assault in Missouri Eastern Correctional Facility. The family would eventually move to Missouri, so I think he served time in both California and Missouri, and perhaps he transferred to be closer to his kids. At the time of the murder, he was serving a 10-year sentence, and I believe at least one of the charges included a stabbing. His legal convictions were not as easy to find information about. With Caesar gone, Michelle began to fall apart even more. She herself was arrested for petty crimes, things like drug possession and driving while intoxicated.
So do the kids get taken away from her then?
They are going to.
Okay.
The situation continued to sour until Alyssa witnessed her mother, Michelle, overdose on drugs. She survived the ordeal, but psychological damage was done to little Alyssa. My guess is that this little girl, up until this point, rarely felt safe or secure. She would have been around 6, maybe even 7 when this happened, and sadly, it wouldn't be the last time she watched her mom overdose and then survive.
That is traumatic.
Extremely. With Caesar locked up, Michelle began to get her itch scratched often by other men. Her intoxicated lifestyle led her to have various sexual partners until she fell pregnant for a 3rd time. She gave birth to another little girl named Emma, so Alyssa's half-sister, bringing her child total to 4. With a brand new baby and 3 others to care for, Michelle became romantically involved with a known drug dealer. Michelle would sometimes take off for days and leave the kids to fend for themselves, which meant young Alyssa, now a little bit older, had to take care of herself and her 3 younger siblings. Sadly, this pattern continued for a couple of years. Alyssa became the parental figure. Still under the age of 10, she took care of the kids, cleaned the trailer, and did her best to keep her mom safe. Often, Michelle would be passed out while Alyssa ran around trying to take care of things. But Alyssa was just a young child and couldn't take care of things the same way as an adult would, so the trailer was said to become quite filthy. Being unsupervised, Alyssa's twin brothers, who were now around 3 years old, became extremely unruly, almost feral, which really isn't that surprising when they are almost just left to raise themselves. Their mother was not taking care of them. She didn't meet their needs, including the need to be loved, taught, and given boundaries. These little boys would get so out of control and so rageful that when they got angry, they would punch holes into the walls.
At 3?
At 3.
Oh, goodness.
Mm-hmm. And that is what is interesting too with this is the boys especially did live in this home setting for enough years that they would have had similar traumas, not as much as Alyssa, but similar traumas, and they turn out just fine.
It is interesting. And we know now that even as an infant, they can experience the trauma. They don't have to be cognitively aware of what's happening. It's the emotion that goes on behind the trauma that actually lays down those beginning brain pathways to tell us how to react to our world around us.
True. So that would have included baby Emma then as well.
Absolutely.
The only difference being maybe was that Alyssa was there to help take care of them.
Mm-hmm. So they did have a caregiver.
Right.
Or at least a constant person. Not that she was old enough to fulfill that role adequately.
Right. But someone that was trying.
Mm-hmm. And that can create a buffer for kids.
Mm-hmm.
And be just enough to help them cope.
Right. And I guess this case could be a good support for that argument. Michelle's parents were still involved at this time, helping out as much as they could. Eventually, though, they realized that the help that they were giving just wasn't enough. Karen and Gary made the hard decision to report their daughter to the authorities.
Oh, that would be so difficult.
It would, because they were honestly just trying so hard to help her in every way. Not only with the house and kids, but also financially and even with her addiction recovery.
But there's such a delicate balance between help and enablement.
Right. And they realized this isn't working. We have to do something permanent here.
Okay, so did they keep the kids?
They did.
Okay.
In 2002, when Alyssa was 8 years old, her mother finally lost custody of all 4 of her children. Alyssa and her 3 siblings were sent to live with their grandparents, Karen and Gary. And this is one of those minor details that seems to differ. Some reports say she was as young as 7. Some say she was 9. But they also say 2002, which would make her 8. So it would have been somewhere around this time. Again, I think some of these details are muddled because she was a minor at the time of the attack, so not a lot of court records are public.
Okay.
Karen and Gary were good people and had tried to support their daughter as long as they could, but eventually had to do right by their grandchildren and admit to themselves that their daughter was an unfit parent. It is easy for us to judge and say that they should have done this earlier, but they tried their best, and until you've lived it, you don't really know what it was like for them. They hadn't abandoned their grandchildren, but were exhausting all avenues to try and make home life work for their daughter and grandchildren, until they realized that what they had hoped for was never going to happen.
That would be so difficult.
It would. So kudos to Karen and Gary, because now they're taking on 4 children. Wanting to make a fresh start for their grandchildren, Karen and Gary moved into a farmhouse on a beautiful piece of land in St. Martin's, Missouri. This town was in Cole County and was extremely small and close-knit. In 2020, there were less than 1,200 people residing in St. Martin's. In 2002, when the family moved there, I think there were about 1,000 people living there, so it hasn't grown much. The 3 youngest children began to flourish living with their grandparents. They had safety, they had love, warm food, and fresh air. Alyssa, on the other hand, was older and felt more torn about her transition. She blamed her grandparents for tearing her family apart.
She would have a loyalty to her mom, so this would feel like betraying her.
It did. Because, like you said, at the age of 8 or 9, she didn't have the maturity to recognize that her grandparents had saved her, and that it was her drug-addicted mother and incarcerated father's fault that she had to be apprehended.
Plus, those guys aren't around for her to be angry at, and her grandparents are right there.
Right. And when you feel safe, often that becomes the place that you can express that anger.
Yes.
Because you know they're going to love you anyway.
Yep.
By the time she was 9, Alyssa became so angry at her grandparents that she began rebelling as much as she could. It was also said that she would throw a fit just like a toddler would. Basically because she hadn't really been taught otherwise. She was left to her own demise all those years. So now she's having boundaries and rules, and she's not enjoying that.
That would be a hard transition.
It would. Understandable, though. You can see how this happened.
Mm-hmm.
It was clear that Alyssa had displaced anger. It was easier to blame Karen and Gary for destroying her family rather than accept that this was what needed to happen. This is not unique. Often children of abuse still yearn to be with their parents.
It's the first bond.
And it's a strong one.
Mm-hmm.
It also sounded like Karen and Gary supported the kids in having some safe interactions with their parents. Caesar sent letters from prison, and the kids did see Michelle periodically.
Okay, so they weren't totally cut off.
No, they were trying to support them still having some kind of interaction with the parents.
It's decent of the grandparents, because that's hard to do.
Yes. Honestly, Karen and Gary were just amazing. Karen and Gary said that they knew Alyssa had been through even more than they were aware of. Alyssa was leery of adults and would hardly even speak to Karen and Gary. Her father was abusive, her mother was incoherent most of the time, and we know that multiple men, including a drug dealer, had access to the children. So who knows the horrors that she actually witnessed and experienced? They just felt that something more had happened that they didn't know.
Was she withdrawn?
She was at the beginning, but as she reaches her teenagehood, she actually becomes quite outgoing.
Which is a common pattern, because you want control.
Right. And attention. We'll get into it, but I do feel like she wanted people to react to her.
Well, because when you're being reacted to, you're not being the one reacted on, if that makes sense.
Right. You're not the one reacting.
Yeah.
Karen and Gary tried to get help for Alyssa, but to no avail. When Alyssa turned 13, Michelle came back into the picture. She had apparently stopped using and was trying to get her life back on track. Karen and Gary let her come and stay with them and the children. It was said that when her mom came back, Alyssa was overjoyed. She thought her mom was there to stay. Sadly, this bliss didn't last long. After only a few days, Michelle was back to her old ways and left her kids without even saying goodbye.
Oh.
This trauma was a major turning point for Alyssa. She must have felt so abandoned by her mother, and her dream of being a family with her mother was crushed.
That would have been heartbreaking.
Yes. Just enough to get her hopes up and then crash them back down.
What a dirtbag mother.
Yeah, she was not thinking of her children at all. Unable to cope with her sadness and devastation, Alyssa ingested an entire bottle of Tylenol, trying to end her short life. She was discovered in time to be taken to the hospital and have her stomach pumped. After this incident, Alyssa agreed to see a mental health professional. The doctor diagnosed Alyssa with depression and stated that there was a possibility that she also had bipolar disorder. Incidentally, she was prescribed Prozac to help with her symptoms. She was started on 20 milligrams, which I believe is the starting dose for depression, but don't quote me on that because it could be different for teenagers versus adults. But when I looked into it, it seems like it's the base amount. And I'm bringing this up because this does get brought into question later.
Well, even prescribing antidepressants to teenagers can have such differing effects. It can cause huge mood swings.
It's definitely an arguing point later on. Alyssa received both outpatient as well as inpatient care for her depression and self-harming behaviors. I did read that Alyssa's suicide attempt was not an isolated incident.
It's just so sad.
Mm-hmm. The mental torment that she was going through is really heartbreaking, even though she is our dirtbag today. Alyssa seemed to have two sides to her. She could be sweet and charming, outgoing and friendly, and got good grades in school. She even enjoyed going to church with her grandparents and participated in the church's youth activities. On the other hand, she put forth a more daunting image. She began to purposefully represent herself in more sinister ways. As many kids did in the mid-2000s, Alyssa began dressing in more of an emo manner. She had the classic side swooping bangs and lots of dark eyeliner. Alyssa became heavily involved with social media. She created accounts on most of the platforms, including YouTube. Possibly looking for shock value, Alyssa began posting about darker things. She embraced a persona that she referred to as Bad Alyssa. She listed her hobbies as cutting and killing. Sadly, both of these things would become true. Her dark obsession would eventually lead to her taking a life.
And was she already cutting at this time, or was that something that developed after she bragged about it?
No, she was struggling with self-harm. And that self-harm was very evident in a lot of the photos that she posted. She had even carved the words hate and pain into her arms.
Oh my goodness. Those just seem like big cries for help.
So many cries for help. She would also burn herself on purpose and bite herself until she left teeth impressions. Sadly, when processed, there would be over 300 cuts and self-inflicted injuries reported to be on Alyssa's body. That's a lot of sadness inside one little girl. Alyssa would post pictures of herself with red lipstick smeared down her lips to make it appear like blood. Her eyeliner she would make into diamond shapes sometimes, almost like a spooky clown or Joker. She posted a photo where it looked like her hand was forming into a gun, pointed at her own head. In another posted photo, she is pretending to stab a friend in the gut. So there's a lot of these photos where she's doing it to get a reaction. There's another one where she's almost growling, like with her hand in a claw-like position at the camera. So she was definitely putting out this quote-unquote bad Alyssa image.
Okay.
There was one particular video that got a lot of attention after the incident. It is a video of Alyssa and her younger twin brothers outside. There was an electric fence on their property, and Alyssa was trying to talk her brothers into touching it. Alyssa actually touches the fence first and gets a jolt. She laughs and tries to convince her brothers to do the same. Once they did, Alyssa just kept laughing. Some people viewed this video as sadistic, claiming that Alyssa receives pleasure from torturing other people and wanted to inflict pain to herself and others. Perhaps this is true, or perhaps this is just a case of a sibling trying to prank her brothers. Was it a little extreme? Maybe. But do I think it could be something that most farm kids have done? Also maybe.
Absolutely it is.
That's what I was thinking, but people made a really big deal about this video. And when I watched it, I thought, this is just farm kids being farm kids.
Yeah. I don't know anybody that lives on a farm that hasn't done that.
Right?
Yes.
Well, and I think what pulled this video into question was the caption that Alyssa wrote in the video right before her brothers got zapped. It didn't really help her case. She wrote in the video, quote, "This is where it gets good. This is where my brothers get hurt." So she paused the video, put this little caption, and then had her brothers touching it. But they were all laughing and having fun. She didn't force them to touch it.
Right.
But I thought it was worth mentioning because if you do look into this case, there's a lot of discussion about this video.
I don't want to out myself, but just this week, my daughter was goofing around on some gym equipment that we had, and she was placing herself upside down and trying to do a Spider-Man pose. And she fell. We posted the video laughing at her. So sometimes that's just funny. How many times do we see memes or watch reels of somebody getting hurt and we all laugh?
Yes.
And there's those kinds of captions on them. There's whole shows based on watching people get hurt.
That is true. And how many dads out there haven't given their kids a 9-volt battery to put their tongue on just so they get a little zap because it's funny? Maybe we're terrible, but when I watched it, I didn't think this was necessarily malicious. I was like, no, this is just what happens when you live on a farm.
Yeah. Not even just on a farm. I'm not seeing it as overly malicious right now, but things are always different when you view them in hindsight, right?
Right.
You could view something as really childish and innocent had you not known what was going to come next.
Right.
Right. But because she has committed murder, now you're going back through her history and saying, oh, this was a clue. This was something.
Yes. People are searching for answers.
Right.
And maybe it was. I don't know. But I also feel that sometimes you can look back and make everything tainted that way.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Another thing, though, that didn't help Alyssa's case was testimony from her close friend who stated that Alyssa told her that she wondered what it would be like to kill someone.
Okay, that's a little more damning.
This is definitely. During her own 15th birthday party, Alyssa said to her friend, quote, "I just wonder what it would be like to just kill someone. See the life just drain out of someone. I wonder what it would feel like, that type of power, to take that away from someone."
Oh, and there's a key word in there, isn't it? Power. It seemed like it was all about power to her, which makes sense with her background where she had no power.
Yes. Even having to live with her grandparents, even though it's a safer place, she didn't have the power to make that decision.
No.
She would also make violent remarks when kids would pass them in school, saying things along the lines of, "I wonder what it would be like to slit their throats," or talk about shooting someone when they upset her. It was clear that Alyssa was angry, depressed, and had a tendency towards violence, but her grandparents were aware and were trying to get her the help that she needed. It was one of those cases where hindsight is golden, but in the moment you could chalk up some of her behavior stemming from being upset over her parents' abandonment and neglect.
And the years of trauma that she had already experienced.
Yes.
It's amazing to see how many children will strike out first because they're fearful of what somebody coming at them will do.
Right.
And as we get older, that striking out that in kindergarten looked like just hitting somebody or biting them, then takes on a more subtle tone. So now you're uttering threats. You're putting up this protective guard around you.
Right.
It becomes more subtle, but the root of it is still the same.
Yes, I agree. It comes down to that power. And I think that is even evident in a lot of toxic relationships. If anyone knows a narcissist who is controlling that way, that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're going to gaslight you to make you think it's your fault.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, things would come to a deadly head on the evening of Wednesday, October 21st, 2009. Alyssa's younger sister, Emma, had a good friend named Elizabeth Olten, who lived down the road from the Bustamante's home. Emma was only 6 at the time. Elizabeth was 9 years old, but the two girls often played together and enjoyed one another's friendship. Remember, this is a rural area with only around 1,000 people, so it's not like there were 100 kids on their block to play with. At around 5:00 p.m., Emma knocked on Elizabeth's door and asked if she could come out and play. The girls had played together 100 times before, but Elizabeth's mother, Patty, didn't feel good about it this time. Patty had a few children that she was tending to and was also trying to get supper on the table. She was busy and knew she wouldn't be able to watch the girls. Emma and Elizabeth really wanted to play, and finally, after she had already said no, the two young girls convinced Patty to let them go play at Emma's just for a little while.
Oh, no.
Mm-hmm.
Why does it always happen this way?
I know, it's so haunting.
Where they have a gut feeling?
Yep.
Oh, it just makes you sick.
But as parents, we can all relate to how this would have happened. Patty reminded the girls that it got dark around 6:30 and instructed Elizabeth to be home in an hour by 6:00. The girls happily agreed and went on their merry way together. Patty wasn't worried about her daughter being home on time because Elizabeth was afraid of the dark. Their properties were surrounded and separated by a dense, thick forest area, and Elizabeth was especially scared to go into the woods after dark, so Patty knew she'd be back in time to eat. Patty later said that one of the reasons that she let Elizabeth go that night was because she was getting on her brother's nerves. She said about her daughter, quote, "She was going to be in a play at school, so she was practicing her lines and doing her little songs and irritating her brother, and I was getting ready to cook dinner." As a mother, this is relatable. She was busy with kids and trying to get dinner on the table. The son was getting annoyed, and so when Emma came to ask Elizabeth to play, it would seem like a convenient solution to get everything done more efficiently and smoothly.
Oh, I can totally relate.
Yes. Patty continued to say, quote, "She, meaning Emma, had asked if Elizabeth could go play, and originally I told her no because I was getting ready to make dinner. And both girls were hopping up and down and begging, wanting to go play, and I was like, okay, you can go for an hour." She had to be home by 6. I feel like every parent has been through a situation like this when you cave against your better judgment because your child is so excited about doing something. Plus, both families had multiple children and they all played at one another's houses often. This wasn't an isolated incident outside of their regular routine. What was outside of their regular routine was that 6:00 rolled around and Elizabeth didn't return home. Patty had set dinner out on the table and thought it odd that her daughter wasn't home on time, like she usually was. Patty quickly called Karen, Emma's grandmother, to see if Elizabeth had headed home yet. Karen told her neighbor that she hadn't even seen Elizabeth that day. Patty knew something was wrong. She said, quote, "I just knew it wasn't right. They left together and the grandmother was telling me she was never there. That's when I called police."
So did Karen say that Emma was at home? Or does she know where Emma is at this time?
Emma was at home by the time she called, but she hadn't seen Elizabeth.
So Elizabeth had never made it to the house.
Elizabeth does, but the grandma hadn't seen her.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's not like they were inside playing. And she hadn't asked her grandma if Elizabeth could come over. She actually wasn't allowed to go over there by herself to ask her if she could come play. This is literally every parent's nightmare. I cannot even imagine the sick pit that she would have formed in her stomach when she called her neighbor and Karen said she hadn't even seen her daughter. Within 15 minutes after Patty placed the call to the police, the Cole County Sheriff's Department arrived at her home. The police went with Patty over to her neighbor's home, and when they couldn't find Elizabeth at Bustamante's, a search was quickly organized. The fire department joined forces with the police, and before long, so many locals came to join the search party that there were literally hundreds of people looking for Elizabeth. This is a lot considering that there were not many people who lived there locally. With there being no signs of foul play, the search was organized into a grid, stemming from the Bustamante's home and going outward to neighboring properties as well as the thick forest that surrounded them. I think everyone searching was hoping that 9-year-old Elizabeth had just gotten lost on her way home. Hattie, being an extra cautious mother, had given Elizabeth a cell phone to take with her that night. Despite placing numerous frantic calls to Elizabeth's phone, she didn't answer. They didn't know it yet, but it was already too late. Police ordered an emergency ping from the cell phone company AT&T. The results showed that the phone last pinged from a cell tower near the woods. It quickly became night, and the local authorities knew that they needed backup. They called in help from neighboring law enforcement agencies as well as the FBI. Elizabeth was reported as a missing person. Unfortunately, that night, it began to rain quite a lot, making the search harder than it already was. I believe most people were sent home, leaving a base crew, and the search was to resume full force in the morning. Sergeant David Rice was one of the leading officers on this case, who had been called in the next day. My personal opinion is that he is the reason that this case got solved so quickly. He's actually amazing. He said, quote, "The pings from the phone were all located in the general area of the woods. It was a large wooded area behind the house, but it's thick forest ground, and it was a lot of area to cover." Sergeant Rice said he was confident that Elizabeth was still in the area. About the search, Sergeant Rice also said, quote, "We did a search of the woods of the area. We had checkpoints set up all around the area for everyone driving into and out of the area. We tracked down all the local registered sex offenders. We had planes in the air, helicopters, dog teams, dive teams for the ponds and rivers. Everything that we could do at the time, we were trying to locate her."
It's just so heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know it's all for nothing.
Right. She's already gone. By late Thursday afternoon, almost 24 hours after Elizabeth was reported missing, Sergeant Rice decided to go back to the beginning. He knew that Emma, Elizabeth's friend, was potentially the last person to see Elizabeth before she vanished, and that she had already been questioned by police and the FBI. Emma told everyone that Elizabeth came to her house and they played for about an hour, and then when it was time for her to go, Elizabeth started to walk back towards her own home, and that was the last time Emma saw her. The part of the statement that perked Sergeant Rice's interest was that Emma said that after Elizabeth left, Emma had gotten stuck in some thorn-filled bushes and couldn't get out on her own. She said she cried out for her 15-year-old sister Alyssa to come and help her, which she did. She was in her room but quickly came outside to her rescue. So Emma's saying the two girls were playing. It was time for Elizabeth to head back to her house to be back in time, so she started to walk her way. I started to walk the opposite way, and then I was playing in these bushes in the ditch, and I got stuck in the thorns.
Okay.
So then her sister Alyssa came out and helped her.
So they must have been fairly close to the house then.
Yes, they were.
Okay.
So Elizabeth still has a longer walk home, and Emma's right at her house. And she got stuck not that long after Elizabeth left, but not immediately after.
Okay.
When police questioned all of the children from the two families, the only one who was unaccounted for at the time of the disappearance was Alyssa. But Alyssa stated that she knew nothing about what happened to Elizabeth. No one was super suspicious of Alyssa until a volunteer search team discovered something quite odd in the forest behind the Bustamante's residence. It was after this discovery that Sergeant Rice and his team became heavily involved in the case. Volunteers found what appeared to be a small rectangular grave in the woods, big enough to fit a child. Sergeant Rice's team processed the area for hours, but no body was found in the hole.
It was pre-dug?
This was a pre-dug hole.
Ugh.
Alyssa admitted to digging the hole, but when asked why she dug it, she said that she just liked digging holes and would sometimes bury dead animals in them when she found them, out of respect.
Oh, yeah. I know lots of 15-year-olds that go and dig holes for fun. Please come to my house.
Right?
I've got some trees to plant.
I literally wrote, I don't know about you, but that seems like an odd hobby for a 15-year-old girl.
Yeah.
But she was saying, oh, I like to be outside in nature. There's not a lot to do, so I like to dig holes.
For the random dead animal that I find.
Right, just in case. The situation grew more disturbing when the FBI was given consent to search the Bustamante's home. The home seemed like an average house. That was until an agent entered Alyssa's bedroom. Alyssa had written some disturbing things on her walls, such as, quote, "It was written in blood, it was written in blood," And beside that, possibly written in blood, was the word roar, spelled R-A-W-R. I did hear in one documentary about this that it was written in blood was actually lyrics to a song, but I don't know for sure. There was also a poem about cutting that read in part, quote, I cut to focus when my brain is racing. I cut to make physical what I feel inside. I cut to see blood because I like it.
And this was written by Alyssa.
Yes. And this is all over her walls. Her room was a disaster. Some things were written in pen, but other things were written in blood. I assume her own blood from when she would self-harm. I saw a photo of what looked like an outline of a body on Alyssa's wall. There were cut marks drawn on the head and arms of the body. Beside the body, Alyssa had written the name Emma, the name of her younger sister.
What?
It was said that she didn't always get along with Emma.
She was probably jealous of Emma.
Probably. The agent also noticed cards and letters from Alyssa's father, addressed to Alyssa, posted on her walls, things he had sent to her while still in prison. I saw a picture of one. It was a birthday card. He had drawn some art in it. These items might have been a little chilling to discover, but agents didn't really hit the investigative jackpot until they came across Alyssa's diary, the one place where a teenager can freely write about all of their deepest, darkest secrets.
Under the guise that nobody else is going to read it.
Right. Well, you never do think someone's going to read your diary.
I guess. Not me. I would suspect everybody's going to read my diary. Hence, I don't have one.
I do have a journal, and sometimes I'm like, I hope nobody does read this. I need to make a pact with you, though. If I die, you burn it.
I got you, girl.
Okay. In this diary, though, Alyssa had written about how she wanted to kill people. This wasn't a surprise because she publicly stated this already on her social media profiles. However, she was being a little more specific. For example, she wrote about wanting to burn down a house, killing all of the people inside. This is eerie to me because this wasn't just her saying things to her friends or online to look tough or to get a rise out of people. She didn't intend for anyone to read her diary, so this must have been how she was actually feeling. This was her intimate thoughts.
Yeah, it wasn't just for attention.
No. The last entry in her diary was dated October 21st, 2009, Wednesday, the day Elizabeth went missing. The majority of this entry had been heavily scribbled out with blue ink, all except the last part that said, quote, now I've got to go to church.
Oh dear.
With backlighting, agents would make out two other words, slit and throat. Thankfully, technology was at the point where the entire entry could be recovered. But while that was happening, agents knew that they needed to interrogate Alyssa.
Would your stomach just not flop when you read those words from another child?
I'm going to read you in a little bit. I'll read you the entire entry, but even just for the words slit and throat, yeah, I cannot imagine. You'd feel sick about it.
Yeah.
Because at this point, everyone is still hoping to find Elizabeth alive. Sergeant Rice was one of the officers to officially interview Alyssa. I believe after the FBI questioned her first. In the room was Sergeant Rice, Alyssa, Karen, who's Alyssa's grandmother, and a juvenile officer, Tony Mayer, who was there on Alyssa's behalf. Sergeant Rice handled this interview perfectly, in my opinion. It was recorded, and I was able to watch the entire thing. Sergeant Rice later said that people are very uncomfortable with silence during an interview, so he would purposely wait sometimes 40 to 60 seconds at a time and could see Alyssa grow more and more uncomfortable. Her body language actually suggests that she was quite relaxed at the beginning. She was leaning to the side of her chair and acting like she had nothing to hide, but eventually she broke down. I'm going to go into some of the details of this interview, but first I want to point out that Sergeant Rice was from Missouri State Highway Patrol and is a brilliant interrogator. Tony Meyer, the juvenile officer, on the other hand, was so unprofessional during this interview that, although it is made public, the recording would end up not being allowed to be used in court because of this juvenile officer.
What could he have done that would have made it so bad that they couldn't use it in court?
Well, first of all, it's a she. Her name is Tony.
Okay.
But as a juvenile officer, Tony's only purpose and objective in being present during the interview was to make sure that Alyssa's rights had not been violated. She is to stay neutral and only speak up if said rights are being infringed upon. And I'm not doing it right now, but I am going to go into exactly what she did to get this thrown out of evidence.
How many cliffhangers in this case, Christy?
We're getting there. But I just thought I'm going to point it all out now because like it's so sad that it was an art for him, really. And then
she ruined it all.
She ruined it. The purpose in having Grandma Karen there was also to protect Alyssa's rights as a minor. And she was allowed to stay the entire interview unless Alyssa decided otherwise, which does end up happening.
She just has so much animosity towards her grandma, or she doesn't want her to hear certain things?
She doesn't want her to hear certain things.
Ugh.
Sergeant Rice is allowed to mislead Alyssa, as any interrogating officer is, to ultimately get the truth out of her. So I just wanted to go through everybody's roles before we get into it. Sergeant Rice begins with getting Alyssa to walk him through the day that Elizabeth went missing. She says she went to school, came home, went for a walk in the woods, went back inside the house, helped Emma out of the thorn bushes, went back inside and got ready for the church youth activity that took place on Wednesday nights from 7 to 8 p.m. This week, there was a dance. So she's saying that was my day.
And most of that is true.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Alyssa tells Sergeant Rice that when she helped her sister out of the bushes, Emma asked her why her pants had blood on them. Alyssa says that she told her sister that she started her period, and so don't tell anyone. This is believed to be a way for Alyssa to stay ahead of why she had blood on her pants. She did not have her period at the time. The blood did not belong to her, but her sister saw it and she needed a cover story.
She had already killed Elizabeth by this time.
Yes.
That was quick.
It is. We're going to go through the timeline and it is so fast. Sergeant Rice questions Alyssa about the hole she dug. She again says she likes to dig holes for fun because she gets bored easily, but also gets entertained easily. Sergeant Rice asks her multiple times about the day, hoping to get her to slip up. This is also a tactic to see if she gets frustrated by having to repeat herself. Most innocent people will lose their patience a little, but if you are guilty, you want to come across as having nothing to hide and being willing to help, even if it means saying the same thing over and over again. And Alyssa was very happy to oblige him, asking her multiple times what she did that day.
You would get frustrated. I would get frustrated if somebody was asking me over and over again what I did.
Right. And I didn't realize that this was a technique. But if you're guilty, you're probably not going to get frustrated. You want to appear calm and cooperative.
Overly so.
Yes. And she is. She's very willing to explain things to him. She's even showing him on a map where she went for her walk and just acting so relaxed, like nothing to hide.
Which is interesting because that's not the personality that you've described with her grandparents when they try to question her or enforce things.
Right. But she did have this dual personality where she could be super outgoing and bubbly.
Okay. So she's good at masking.
Mm-hmm. Sergeant Rice asks her if she's dug holes like that one before and questions her timeline of when she dug it. At first she says she has dug holes just like it. The hole was 3 feet by 4.5 to 5 feet in size and had sides that went straight down in a perfect rectangular shape. Alyssa originally said she dug it on Sunday. When Sergeant Rice tells her that she will need to show them the other holes like that one that they found, she says she already filled them in. He assures her that sonar technology will prove it was the same size hole, even if it was from a year earlier and now full of dirt. This is when Alyssa says that the other ones were smaller, like shoebox size. So he is starting to catch her in little lies. And you can see just how young she is by thinking she can trick him or satisfy his inquest by saying, oh, well, I filled those ones back in.
Mm-hmm.
That they're not going to know that the ground was disturbed. And he does sometimes stretch the truth a little bit about what the technology can do. And of course, she believes him because she doesn't know otherwise.
Right.
Next, Sergeant Rice moves to the timeline of digging the holes. Alyssa originally said Sunday, but she had been visiting her mother that weekend, as she sometimes did, and didn't get home until 6:30. Sergeant Rice points out that it's already dark by 6:30 at night. And so then she says it must have been Saturday, but then quickly corrects herself and says it was Friday because they didn't have school and she knew she dug it in the daylight.
Okay, so now she's really all over the map.
Right, starting to. Sergeant Rice points out to her that the hole looked like she gave up digging it deeper because she hit a patch of roots that were too hard to dig through. She kind of agrees. He tells her it looks like a grave to investigators who are used to seeing that type of thing in crime scenes. She chalks it up to just bad timing to having dug a hole that shape and size. She's like, yeah, that's bad timing that I would dig a hole like that when this is all happening. Because I can see how it would look like a grave, but it wasn't.
But prior to that, she's already said that she digs graves for animals.
For animals.
Okay.
But she's chalking it up to, ooh, yeah, bad timing on my part. Oops. But I thought it was interesting that Sergeant Rice made the connection that it would have been deeper had she not hit the roots of the tree.
Mm-hmm.
Sergeant Rice asks Alyssa what she thinks might have happened to Elizabeth. And he's building rapport with her, saying things like, we've asked everybody their opinion. What do you think happened? She responds that she thinks that Elizabeth might have been kidnapped if she walked home along the highway, because she didn't think that she was the type of girl to run away, especially at the age of 9. And there was a way that you could get to each other's house if you walked along the highway. It would take longer, but then she could avoid going through the woods.
Which she was afraid of.
Right.
So that kind of makes sense.
For sure, because everyone knew that Elizabeth didn't like to be in the woods alone. This would also support the idea that anybody could have taken her. At this point in the investigation, this is what the community was assuming had happened, so Alyssa was going with it, saying, oh yeah, she probably went home on the highway and someone picked her up there.
She had heard these rumors circulating and was picking up on it.
Right, because people are all over her property looking.
Mm-hmm.
She's right there where it's all happening. Sergeant Rice then asks her what type of person did she think would do something like that, and she responds, quote, a sick person? Sergeant Rice gets blunt with Alyssa and comes straight out and asks her if she had anything to do with Elizabeth disappearing, and if she killed her or if she knows where she is. Elizabeth quickly answers no to all of his questions while shaking her head. Sergeant Rice then asks Alyssa what the FBI found in her room. She says she had marijuana seeds, but he assures her that he doesn't care about that. She then says they took her pillowcase and blanket, but she didn't really survey her room afterwards to see what else they took. This is when Grandma Karen starts listing things off, like some of Alyssa's clothing and her diary. She says she got a list from the FBI of what they took. It is clear that Karen has no idea what her granddaughter has done and is just thinking this is routine questioning and trying to be helpful. However, this comment opened the door for Sergeant Rice to start talking about the diary. It played out perfectly. Sergeant Rice asks Karen if she's ever read Alyssa's diary, to which she says yes. Alyssa gets upset by this, and Sergeant Rice asks like he's siding with her and understands why she is upset. Karen explains that she doesn't look for it, but might read a page if it's left out and open.
So why couldn't he bring up the diary unless there was a segue into it?
He was going to bring up the diary, but this just worked out perfectly because Grandma brought up the diary.
Oh, so it was a more natural segue.
Yes.
But how sad is that? Because she's totally blindsided.
Yeah, I did feel for her in that aspect because you can tell she was upset, and he asks her, did you know your grandma's read it? And she's like, nope. It's also, though, helping to unnerve her a little bit.
Oh, I meant how sad for the grandma because she is totally blindsided.
Oh, both. Yeah. Yeah, the grandma, she had no idea. She obviously hadn't read enough in the diary to be concerned about what was in the diary. And Alyssa's trying to say, well, it's just embarrassing teenage things that you write in there. So I'm just embarrassed.
Right. And she's writing some pretty crude stuff on her walls. So really, what is she writing in her diary that's going to shock anybody?
Well, the last entry does, when that gets recovered. Sergeant Rice shifts the conversation to inform Alyssa that technology can allow them to read every single thing written in her diary, including anything that has been scribbled over. The energy in the room shifts, but Karen still has no idea as to why. Because now Sergeant Rice and Alyssa both know what he's talking about, but Karen is oblivious.
Now is my comment about how sad she is totally going to be blindsided.
100%. It is actually heartbreaking to witness this happen. Sergeant Rice tells Alyssa that even if it was an accident, they have to know what happened. I think this gave her hope that she could lie her way out of what really occurred in the woods. Alyssa tells a story about how they were just, quote unquote, messing around in the woods, and then Elizabeth fell and hit her head and died. She said she was afraid she'd get into trouble, so she decided to get rid of the body. When asked how, she said she burned her body and scattered it in the creek.
That's really childish.
Yeah.
To not know what temperatures you need to disintegrate bones.
Exactly. Sergeant Rice knew this was a lie, even though they hadn't found Elizabeth yet. It takes a heat source of about 100 degrees Celsius and at least 2 hours to burn a body. There is no way this could have happened in the timeline of the night in question. But he's like, how did you make the fire? Oh, I just collected some twigs and wood. There's no way you're making a fire that nobody's going to notice.
Or that gets that hot.
Yes.
Yeah.
Without burning that forest down. And you don't even have the time. And even for her to say, well, I scattered her in the creek. Yeah, it's not going to ash like it does in the crematorium.
No, it's all hogwash.
Mm-hmm. But she is so young that she doesn't know. She doesn't know enough yet to know that that's not how it would work.
Right. But what is Karen's reaction?
Oh, just wait. Because right now it's just very quiet. Karen's listening intently because she's saying this is an accident. This is what happened. So she's wanting to believe her granddaughter.
Who just admitted to burning somebody.
Yeah. It is believed that Alyssa was hoping that if she could convince them that there was no body, then she could convince them that it was an accident. Sergeant Rice then tells her that even if the body was burned, they would be able to determine her cause of death. They would know if she fell and hit her head.
This is where he's stretching the truth.
Yeah, because if she was burned, he didn't know for sure if she tried to burn. They wouldn't have necessarily every piece of evidence, but he's telling her, oh no, even if it's burned, we'll know.
Yeah.
Next, Sergeant Rice goes right out and asks Alyssa if Elizabeth's throat was cut. She didn't know that he had already read her diary, but Alyssa answered yes. When this happens, Karen gasps and begins crying out. At this point, Alyssa asks if her grandma can leave. Karen goes out of the room and you can hear her screaming and crying.
Oh.
Yeah, it gives me goosebumps.
The anguish. She tried so hard to protect that little girl.
Oh, you can hear it in her voice. Like, I have goosebumps right now. I assume someone outside of the room was trying to comfort her because you can hear her yell in the most heartbroken cry, quote, "It will never be okay." And then she screams no.
That would be so awful.
After this, it takes some careful questioning, but Alyssa eventually admits to slicing Elizabeth's throat and stabbing her twice. She said she went home, washed the kitchen knife, and then left it in the sink. Then went up to her room, got cleaned up, and went to the church activity. And I thought, how does someone kill a kid and then go to a fun activity right afterwards?
With a bunch of kids. And what the heck is she doing in the woods with a kitchen knife?
It just proves that this was premeditated. Sergeant Rice asks her why she did it, and she simply says, I don't know. More truth eventually came out to what really happened. But before we go on, I'm going to just quickly explain what Tony Meyer, the juvenile officer, did to get this interview thrown out of evidence. This beautifully crafted interview that Sergeant Rice had so carefully conducted. Throughout the interview, Tony would add to the conversation and even ask Alyssa questions, which is not allowed. She's just supposed to be quiet. My guess is she had also already read the diary and just wanted to get her to confess, but this was not her role. She used terminology like we. For example, we don't care if you were smoking, making it appear that she is in line with the police, not a neutral party. She tries to break the tension by acting relatable to what Alyssa was saying, again, strictly prohibited. Near the end of the interview, when Sergeant Rice steps out and it's just Alyssa and Tony in the room, Alyssa asks her what will happen to her. Tony tells her what will happen as far as processing goes, but assures her that because she is a juvenile, they will seek treatment, not punishment, which can be seen as a form of manipulation.
So then Alyssa's going to think it's okay to tell them everything because I'm not going to be punished. I'll just get treatment.
Yeah, I'll just go to a hospital. Because she's like, oh, what hospital did you go to before? Yeah, they'll probably just send you for treatment. Totally manipulating the situation. And this isn't even all of it. This was just a few of the things that I decided to share. And in all honesty, she screwed the pooch in this interview. And thank goodness that the authorities were able to gather more concrete evidence in this case. Because this was a perfect piece of evidence thrown out.
That is so sad.
Mm-hmm.
And maddening.
It is. Because she knew better. She knew what her role was and just couldn't help herself. There is even a point where Alyssa is crying and the grandma's crying and they're getting tissues. And Sergeant Rice is right on the cusp of getting Alyssa to say things. And because Alyssa's upset, Tony asks the grandma, do you want to switch spots with me? Because Tony was sitting right next to Alyssa. And Sergeant Rice puts out his hand like, stop.
Like, you are wrecking this.
Yes, I'm right in a momentum here. And you're going to change chairs with the grandma. Like, he actually puts his hand out and is like, stop, not right now.
Oh, he must have been so frustrated.
Oh, yeah. The only thing she did that I think was her job was when she needed to go pee. she had everybody else leave the room so that Alyssa wouldn't be alone with Sergeant Rice to protect her.
Right.
That was the only thing it looked like that she did that was her job. And I'm sorry, not to hate on this lady. We all make mistakes. She was probably caught up in the emotion of it all too. The whole town is looking for Elizabeth. She's just found out what's actually happened, but she should have kept it professional.
That is unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
But they go on to find more evidence.
They do. Thinking that she would likely just go back to the hospital, Alyssa agreed to take police to the spot where she had buried Elizabeth's body. So again, you could look at it as being manipulated into doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Before I go into the details of what really happened that frightful night, let me tell you a little bit more about Elizabeth. Elizabeth K. Olten was born on December 15th, 1999 in Jefferson City, Cole County, Missouri, to parents Patricia Patty Carwile Priest and Dale Olten Sr. Elizabeth was 9 years old at the time of her death and in grade 4 at Pioneer Trails Elementary School in Jefferson City. She had been excited to be cast in the school play and had been happily practicing her lines and songs right before being led to her death. Elizabeth loved music. She was especially a fan of Taylor Swift and the TV show Hannah Montana. She liked to play with her friends and dress up her pets. She enjoyed baking cookies and doing puzzles with her mom. Elizabeth was the youngest of 5 siblings and a little shy. She was beautiful inside and out. She had gorgeous brown hair and brown eyes. She was described as being happy. Autopsy reports revealed that Elizabeth had been strangled. She was beaten and had bruising around her neck. Her throat was slashed, her wrists were cut, and she had been stabbed 8 times. Elizabeth's family gave her a funeral fit for a princess. Her casket was taken to the cemetery on a white horse-drawn carriage pulled by 2 majestic white horses through a sea of pink balloons, which some people wrote messages to Elizabeth on. Her loved ones wore pink on this sad day because it was Elizabeth's favorite color. The poor girl was outlived by even her great-grandparents and would have been turning 25 this year.
That is quite the funeral.
It, to me, looked like what should have been happening on her wedding day. Police did their due diligence to make sure that Alyssa worked alone. At first, they questioned if her grandfather helped her cover up the murder, mainly because they knew she couldn't have dug 2 holes so quickly after the murder like Alyssa claimed. So they were saying, well, did your grandpa help you? Did you tell him? And he was trying to help cover it up. And she's adamant, no, grandpa did not help me. And he didn't.
Even the attack seems so quick.
Yes, it all happened so fast. Police also questioned if Alyssa's 16-year-old boyfriend had anything to do with it. The day after the murder, Alyssa skipped school to hang out with him. And I'm leaving his name out on purpose because he shouldn't be tied to this girl. The boyfriend was interviewed 8 times over 7 days by the FBI and Sergeant Rice's team. The boyfriend said that Alyssa told him about her missing neighbor and that her home had been searched. He admitted to finding a black box cutter in Alyssa's backpack, but it was too small to be the murder weapon. The boyfriend failed a polygraph test, but when he was told about Elizabeth's murder, he became ill and had to vomit. He has never been charged with any crime, and I honestly think he had no idea what his girlfriend had done.
Mm.
After much consideration, it was ultimately decided that 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante would be tried as an adult.
Wow, that's a stretch for a 15-year-old.
While under Missouri law, children as young as 12 can be tried as an adult for first-degree murder. At first, she was sent to Hawthorne Children's Psychiatric Hospital. She was reportedly sent here after becoming overly distraught from finding out that she would be tried as an adult. Later, in November, the judge ordered her to spend 4 days in Fulton State Hospital for a psychological evaluation. Although she had some mental health concerns, Alyssa was fully aware of her actions the night she took Elizabeth's life. Alyssa first entered a not guilty plea on December 8th, 2009.
Even though she had confessed.
That confession couldn't be used. It was like she never had. But when she learned that she was being tried as an adult, she feared that she could receive the death penalty, so she entered a plea of guilty of second-degree murder 2 years later on January 10th, 2012, about a month before her first-degree murder trial was scheduled to begin. Her lawyers would say that she changed her plea because she wanted to take responsibility for her actions, but I'm thinking hogwash. There's no way.
Yeah, she wanted to avoid the death penalty.
Mm-hmm. She was pleading not guilty because she knew that her confession was not allowed to be used, and it wasn't until a month before, knowing, okay, I could get the death penalty, that she changed. Regardless, this guilty plea would allow more of the truth to come out.
Because they do an agreed-upon statement of facts?
Mm-hmm. In her first interview, she wasn't telling the whole truth, obviously. On October 21st, 2009, Alyssa told her younger sister that she wanted her to go get Elizabeth so that they could all hang out.
What?
Yes.
Oh.
Alyssa often treated her like she was annoying, and so Emma was excited about this offer.
That she got to hang out with her cool big sister.
Yes. So it was Alyssa's idea for Emma to go get her friend. When it was getting close to when Elizabeth would need to start walking home, around 5:45 p.m., Alyssa told her sister Emma to go home. She then told Elizabeth that she wanted to show her something in the woods. Alyssa grabbed Elizabeth's hand, who was also likely excited to hang out with a much older kid. Alyssa led her into the woods and told her, quote, "I've got something really neat to show you. It's just a little bit further up here." Unbeknownst to Elizabeth, Alyssa had a large knife hidden in the back waist of her pants. It was a knife that you would commonly use for chopping, not a small steak knife. For a quarter of a mile, a 15-minute walk, Alyssa led Elizabeth further and further into the thick trees. Alyssa knew exactly where she wanted to take Elizabeth because she had actually dug the grave earlier in the week. I think Sergeant Rice was right. The original hole they found was too large to keep digging through the large tree roots, so she had to prepare a second hole. I will note that some people think that she originally dug 2 holes to house her twin 11-year-old brother's bodies after killing them, but I don't think that is true. I think that's just speculation. I think she tried to dig it, didn't work, went to a different spot. Once she had her where she wanted her, Alyssa attacked unsuspecting Elizabeth. I am unsure of the exact order because reports differ, but basically Alyssa began beating Elizabeth. While facing her, she repeatedly tried strangling her, which caused the bruising around her neck. She stabbed her and then slit her throat. Alyssa then shoved the young girl's body into the pre-dug hole and covered it in with dirt using her bare hands, and covered the top with leaves and debris.
So how is she not noticed coming back to the house all muddy?
She had cleaned up for the activity. She was back at her house by 6:15. She had murdered and buried Elizabeth in 30 short minutes. Most of that time even would have been walking there. So I think as soon as she got her by the hole that she had dug, she just quickly killed her, put her in, and then went back home. She probably ran home.
And she still helped Emma out of the bush.
Right. She had just got home. She washed the knife, put it in the sink, went upstairs to start getting cleaned up, heard her sister screaming for her, went down, helped her out.
Do you think she went back when she heard her sister screaming because she was afraid that maybe she had found her?
Could have been. I didn't even think of that. But I think she could tell she was screaming from close by. But maybe she's thinking maybe she watched me do it. Maybe she followed me in.
Yeah.
Who knows? I hope she was panicking. Prosecutor Mark Richardson said, quote, "This was very premeditated by the 15-year-old murderer because she had dug the grave holes at least 5 days in advance of the murder. And it was premeditated in the sense that she sent her sister down to get Elizabeth out of the house for the purpose of murdering her." And I cannot imagine how Emma would have felt afterwards, knowing she was a pawn in her friend's murder, even though she was not to blame at all. Hopefully, she was too young at the time to have to carry that with her year after year.
No, I think that realization would come, though.
Yeah.
That is sad.
Really sad. Had the original confession been admissible in court, Alyssa could have rightfully been tried for first-degree murder, the appropriate charge for premeditation. About discovering Elizabeth's body, Sergeant Rice said, quote, "She knew exactly where it was, led us directly to it. It was not well covered. Once she pointed out the area and you looked a little bit closer, you could see that she was only a few inches, if that, under the ground, and you could see body parts that came up covered with mud. It's a pretty horrifying homicide." Because remember, it had also rained a lot that first night, so the gravesite was a mess.
Would have depressed.
Yep.
Okay. That answers my question then.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was thinking she moved from the first site because she couldn't dig it past 4 feet. So she must have dug it down quite a ways, but she hadn't compacted the soil on top of it.
Right.
And the rain did.
And I think when she actually did it, it was different than she thought it was going to be. And I think she was panicking, just shoving the dirt in with her hands, throw a few sticks and leaves on top, and then hurried home. She had to get to her church dance, remember?
Yes, of course.
But how eerie to walk up to that and see little pieces of Elizabeth sticking out of the ground. That would be haunting. Elizabeth's diary entry that had been recovered, the one that had been scribbled out with blue ink, was read during the hearing. It read, quote, "I just effing killed someone. I strangled them and slit their throat and stabbed them. Now they're dead. I don't know how to feel ATM, which means at the moment. It was amazing, spelled AHMAZING. As soon as you get over the, oh my gee, I can't do this feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. I'm kind of nervous and shaking right now though. Kay, I gotta go to church now, LOL, which means laugh out loud.
That is disturbing. She enjoyed it.
She did. She was obviously on an adrenaline high when she was writing this and saying, once I got over that feeling, it was pretty good. And then to make a joke to herself, okay, well, now I got to go to church. Ha ha ha.
Oh,
it's pretty despicable. Also in her journal, about a week before the murder, Alyssa wrote, quote, if I don't talk about it, I bottle it up. And when I explode, someone's going to die. It was clear that Alyssa was fixated on killing someone. She was troubled and had a rough start to life, but she had been in a stable environment leading up to the murder. The defense did argue for leniency. They wanted the least possible punishment for her.
Well, she's a child, Christy.
That's what they said, that she was a child and that her childhood and mental health issues were to blame. Alyssa had been diagnosed with major depressive disorder and borderline personality disorder. The defense also pointed out that after her suicide attempt on Labor Day 2007, Alyssa had been prescribed Prozac. And just 2 weeks before the murder, her dose was doubled to 40 milligrams. They suggested that the increased dosage could have led her to murder. Of course, the defense had a psychiatrist testify that this could be true. And the prosecution had a psychiatrist testify that it couldn't possibly have caused the vicious and violent attack.
I hate when that happens in a trial. So many expert opinions that mean nothing.
Yeah. But this is actually more like a hearing because she's confessed. But I was thinking, if you were a jury to this, how would you decide? Because two experts saying opposite things. It was argued that Alyssa chose to murder Elizabeth solely out of curiosity. Prosecutor Mark Richardson said about her motive that it was, quote, one of the most reprehensible motives for murder that exists in humankind. And that is to murder a person for the thrill of murdering them.
For entertainment.
Yep. During the sentencing phase, Alyssa addressed Elizabeth's family. She said, quote, I cannot even understand what you guys are going through. I'm sorry for that. If I could give my life to bring her back, I would, and I'm sorry. She also said, quote, I really am extremely, very sorry for everything. I know words can never be enough, and they can never adequately describe how horribly I feel for all of this. But this was really the only time that she seemed to show remorse.
Did she read it off a piece of paper?
She might have, actually. I don't remember, but she might have. Regardless, though, in response to this, Elizabeth's sister stated, quote, I don't think she can be sorry. I don't believe anything she says. A lot of people agree with this sister, and I think that the only reason that Alyssa apologized was because her lawyers had instructed her to do so. Elizabeth's mother, Patty, said, quote, she was being fed what to say to us from her attorney, so none of it was real. Elizabeth's family have expressed their hatred towards Alyssa and called her an evil monster. Patty has been quoted saying, quote, I will just say that I hate her. I hate everything about her. What I hate most of all is when people say about her age. The only thing her age makes is an evil monster. 8 times she stabbed my child. In her own words, it was amazing and enjoyable. She threw her in a hole and covered her in dirt like she was nothing. But she was something to me. No one can blame the family for feeling the way that they do, but I do pray that they find some bit of peace in whatever form they are able.
But rightfully so. They are allowed their emotions.
100%. And I honestly don't think Alyssa was very remorseful. I don't think she is.
No, that sounds like a pre-written statement by a lawyer.
Yep. Judge Pat Joyce, a Cole County Circuit judge, sentenced Alyssa Bustamante to the maximum punishment for an adult convicted of second-degree murder. Alyssa was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. She was also ordered to serve a consecutive 30-year term for armed criminal action for using a knife in the attack. Under the guidelines for Missouri, Alyssa was said to have to serve 35 years and 5 months before she is eligible for parole. There were mixed reactions to this sentencing. Some felt she was just a child and could be rehabilitated, that no child should grow up inside prison. But many others feel like Alyssa received her just comeuppance and would be a danger to society if released.
I think I'm with the latter half on this side. I think that's kind of how she's hardwired, unfortunately.
I do too.
Because of her upbringing in her past. That she got pleasure out of it. Ugh.
And I think she would have continued to do it.
Had she gotten away with it, she probably would have just become more brazen.
Yeah. Patty, Elizabeth's mother, has sought justice for her daughter by filing wrongful death suits against not only Alyssa, but also against Pathways Community Behavioral Healthcare. She also allegedly filed a suit against Karen and Gary, Alyssa's grandparents.
Oh, that is sad.
The lawsuit claimed that Pathways personnel knew that Alyssa had violent tendencies and had made threats. She argued that Alyssa should have been detained. Pathways argued that Alyssa only presented as a threat towards herself. The suit against Alyssa was settled for $5 million plus 9% interest per year until the debt is paid. Alyssa obviously is not going to make this much money behind bars. If I understood the suit correctly, I believe this suit is mainly to ensure that Alyssa cannot profit from her crime by things like book deals, documentaries, or other publicity from the case. So if she were to make anything, that would go to Elizabeth's family. Elizabeth's family would also be entitled to collect any amounts in excess of $500 from Alyssa's prison account. It also stated that the execution of its terms is limited to amounts in excess of $25,000 per year. I am not 100% certain, but I believe that the suit against Pathways was dropped. But the one against Karen and Gary was ordered a $400,000 judgment.
That is an interesting ruling for a civil suit. And a scary one as a parent.
Right?
You're responsible for every action your child makes?
Mm-hmm.
Legally? That's scary.
Well, and I think Karen and Gary would have been going through a lot of things themselves as well. Not the same way that Elizabeth's family was, but I guess she wanted some awareness that if you have a child who is acting this way and saying publicly, I want to kill and I want to cut and all of these things, even though they were trying to help.
They were trying to get her treatment, though. What else do you do?
I know. But at the same time, Elizabeth's family were just so angry and trying to seek justice however they could.
I get it.
But that did make my heart break a little bit for Karen and Gary.
Well, it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario.
Absolutely. Yep. They were in between a rock and a hard place.
Mm-hmm.
From what I could tell, Alyssa is currently serving out her sentence at Chillicothe Correctional Center in northern Missouri. Alyssa did petition for a new trial, but was denied. She has also tried to fight her sentence. Just months after she pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in a separate case that juveniles cannot face automatic life sentences without the possibility of parole. Alyssa claims she might not have pleaded if she knew this beforehand. It was decided that had she not accepted her plea, she likely would have been found guilty of first-degree murder. So they didn't give her a retrial.
Good. I think she got off easy.
That being said, though, she would be able to apply for parole earlier than originally expected because of a new law, Senate Bill 754, made in 2021 that states that juvenile offenders convicted of first and second-degree murder should be eligible for parole after serving just 15 years of their sentence.
It's actually longer than some states, which is just crazy.
It is. In just July of this year, so only a couple of months ago, Alyssa was able to apply for parole. She believes that she deserves an early release. Thankfully, she was denied, but she can reapply in 2029. Originally, her earliest date to apply would have been 2044.
That is a big difference in time.
A huge difference, 20-year difference. After this recent parole hearing, Elizabeth's family has stated that this was another day of grieving for them, and all of the hurt and pain was thrown back in the family's faces. As of right now, Alyssa is 30 years old, and it appears that she has every intention of fighting for early release from prison, despite writing in her diary that killing Elizabeth was amazing and pretty enjoyable. And that is the case of a thrill-seeking teenage dirtbag who brutally murdered a child just to see what it felt like. The savagely mean Alyssa Bustamante.
That is a disturbing case, Christy.
It really was.
It's always disturbing when children kill children.
Yeah, there's just so many aspects to it. It's just multifaceted for sure. And the details were just so gruesome and pointless. There was no reason for Elizabeth to die that day, just so that one teenager could feel what it felt like.
To feel the ultimate power over somebody's life?
Yes. She wasn't even killing animals before this. There was no escalation. She wasn't getting into fights. She hadn't stabbed a kid at school. There was just talk of it. And then this happened.
Wow. It's scary how fast a dirtbag can escalate.
Definitely. So again, I want to say thank you to Brianna for being so patient. Hope this episode was worth the wait.
And we hope you'll wait till next week when we have another episode for you.
Please join us then.
Until next week.
See ya.
Bye. right. I'm quick today. Okay. Ready?
Yeah.
Stop laughing. Oh, what's the word I want to use?
You should keep a journal and sell it as a short story. It would be entertaining.
I'm sure I'm going to snap on her.
Pretend you're on a sitcom and the audience is laughing every time that kind of thing happens, and then just like turn and look at the audience, even though there's not one. I dare you. Do it. Because then in your mind, it might be like, okay, this is like comedy. This is... Why is it got to be hard?
Because I'm a difficult person.
You're not. That's why I keep making you do crazy things with me.
Yep,
that's how I
sounded
wrote
better.
it. That's just not how I read it.
Okay.
Okay, third time's a charm, baby. Or perhaps this is just a case of siblings. Or perhaps this is just a case of siblings trying to prank, or a sibling. Or
so did Alyssa go with her?
No, but don't worry.
Okay.
I'm gonna let you know everything.
But they're gonna question Emma.
They will, but we'll get there.
Okay. But I want to know. Okay, but what is Emma saying? Hold on, I gotta shift again. Holy cow, my butt is so sore today. We're done our gummies, Christy. What the heck?
I know. You're gonna make me cry looking at you. At first, they questioned if her grandfather. Now you'll get some more things answered.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.